If you've ever looked up at a small airplane and thought, man, I'd need a PhD in physics to fly that thing, well, I've got some great news for you. You really don't. In this explainer, we're diving into expert Rod Machado's philosophy that the only math you actually need is what he calls grocery store math. Basic adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Seriously, if you can survive a trip to the supermarket, you are perfectly equipped to understand the science of flying. The rest? It's just applying a little common sense to everyday experiences. So get ready because we are going to explore the fundamental parts of an airplane and learn exactly how this incredible machine works. Okay, let's dive into this, because this quote right here is honestly just the best way to visualize what we're dealing with. To instantly demystify what looks like a super complex machine, Machado uses this brilliantly funny visual analogy. He says, think of an airplane as a cigar with two Hershey bars on the sides, a propeller beanie cap on the front, and a tail at the back. I mean, how great is that? It takes an intimidating piece of machinery and turns it into these friendly, recognizable shapes. So let's keep that picture in our heads as our guide today. All right, here is our official pre-flight briefing. We're going to do a logical, front-to-back walk-around tour just like a real student pilot would. We'll cover the anatomy of an airplane, check out the propeller beanie cap, look at the cigar and Hershey bars, inspect the tail feathers, and finally take a peek inside the glass cockpit. Part 1. Anatomy of an airplane. Airplanes are kind of like people. They come in all different sizes, shapes, and colors. Now, we're focusing on general aviation here, which is just the term for private flying, as opposed to massive commercial airlines or military jets. But while their looks can definitely be deceiving, these general aviation planes are actually way more similar than they are different. They all share the exact same fundamental DNA. So I want to reassure you, learning these basic parts on one standard airplane will absolutely apply to almost any plane you ever step foot into. You just got to be a little flexible. Part 2. The propeller beanie cap. All right, so starting our walk around at the very front of the aircraft, we have the propeller. Most general aviation airplanes rely on propellers to generate thrust, which is, the force that actually pulls us through the sky. But take a close look right at the very center of the propeller blades. See that rounded, cone-like structure? It's not just there to look cool. It actually serves a highly specific and absolutely critical purpose for the engine. That piece is called the spinner, and it's exactly what it sounds like, a cone-shaped piece of metal right on top of the prop. But it isn't just for aerodynamics or aesthetics. Its actual job is to deflect air slightly, pushing that rushing air straight into the engine cowling. Now, why does it do that? Well, because airplane engines are, by nature, total hotheads. They generate a massive amount of heat, and they desperately need that deflected air streaming in from the spinner to stay cool and function safely while we're up in the air. Part 3. Cigar and Hershey bars. Okay, let's move down the side of the aircraft and bust our very first piece of aviation jargon, the fuselage. The fuselage is simply the long, central portion of the airplane. If you remember that fun analogy from the beginning of this explainer, this is our cigar. It's the core structural piece, the big main body in the middle onto which absolutely everything else, from the wings to the engine, is bolted, riveted, or glued. So when you're sitting in the cabin, whether you're the pilot or a passenger, you are sitting right inside the fuselage. And bolted right under that fuselage are the wings, or as we called them earlier, those two Hershey bars sticking out of the sides. The wings are where the absolute magic of lift happens. But I want you to look closely at the back edge of the wing, right near the fuselage. See that section that looks like it can hinge downward? Those are the flaps. And this brilliantly illustrates just how dynamic an airplane really is. Flaps are movable surfaces that let pilots literally change the wing's shape in mid-air. When a pilot extends the flaps, it actually increases both the curvature and the total surface area of the wing. Now, why would a pilot want to do that? Well, it's mostly used during landing. By changing the shape of the wing to create more lift, the airplane can safely fly at much slower airspeeds. This allows you to glide down to the runway nice and smooth, rather than coming in way too fast. Part 4. The tail feathers. All right, walking to the very back of the aircraft, welcome to the empennage. Yes, I know it's a very fancy French-sounding aviation term, but we can immediately simplify it. The empennage is just the aft or rear part of the airplane. It's simply the tail feathers. Just like the feathers on the back of an arrow keep it flying perfectly straight toward a target, the empennage houses the vertical and horizontal stabilizers that keep our airplane from wobbling around in the sky. Now, usually when you look at the empennage section, you'll see a fixed horizontal stabilizer with a movable elevator attached to the back of it. But what's really cool is that on some planes, instead of having a separate fixed and moving part, the entire horizontal tail surface actually moves as one solid piece. When an aircraft is designed this way, that structure is called a stabilator or a flying tail. It's honestly just another really clever way aerospace engineers solve the problem of staying stable in the air. Part 5. Inside the glass cockpit. Okay, let's wrap up the outside walk-around and hop inside the cockpit to check out the instrument panel. Now, what's really interesting here is how we can directly compare the old with the new. On one hand, you have the traditional panel featuring those classic 6 analog dials, things like your airspeed indicator and altimeter. On the other hand, you have a modern setup with these sleek digital screens, which is known as a glass cockpit. But here's the secret. You do not have to learn a completely different set of physics to fly the modern version. Mother Nature doesn't change her rules just because we upgraded our tech. So in that modern glass cockpit, you're mainly going to be looking at 2 big screens. And we should definitely decode these acronyms real quick. The PFD is your primary flight display. It presents the exact same basic flight information as those classic 6 analog dials. It's just using newer glass panel technology. Right next to it is the MFD, the multifunction display, which can show you engine instruments, navigation, weather, and traffic info. It's basically a giant, incredibly smart tablet integrated right into your dash. Now, behind all those fancy screens is the airplane's electrical system. And remember how we said earlier that learning aviation is really all about connecting new ideas to everyday things? Well, let's do that right now with the alternator. For electrical equipment to work, something has to provide voltage, or electrical pressure. In an airplane, this is the alternator. But honestly, just think of it like a water pump. Just as a pump pushes water pressure through pipes, the alternator pumps electrical pressure through a pathway called a bus, which gives life to your primary flight display and radios. See? It's literally just everyday plumbing, but with electricity. And just like that, our walk-around is officially complete. Let's lock in those visual analogies one last time so you remember these components forever. We started at the front with the propeller and its spinner, our beanie cap. We examined the main body, the fuselage, which is our cigar. We checked out the wings and flaps, those 2 Hershey bars sticking out the sides. We walked to the back to see the empennage, our tail feathers keeping us stable. And finally, we jumped inside the cockpit, your brand new office in the sky. You now know the fundamental anatomy of an airplane. So you've got the vocabulary down and you know the basic grocery store math, but I want to leave you with one final story about trusting your own senses. The author-instructor Rod Machado used to test if his students were relying way too heavily on their instruments. He'd point out the window and yell, "Oh, look, a UFO!" And the second the student looked away, he'd slap a rubber soap dish right over their airspeed indicator. When they looked back in a total panic, he'd calmly say, "I simulated an airspeed indicator failure. Now fly the airplane using your sense of feel." And you know what? They did. The machinery is incredible, absolutely. But the single most important component in that cockpit is human intuition. As technology gets more and more advanced, how much of flying is in the computers and how much is in you? You've mastered the walk-around. So, are you ready to step onto the tarmac and find out?